Hello there, everybody. It's me, Garrett Kidney, the co-host of You've Got to Be Kidding Me on the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network.
And I am Liam Jones, my full name, and I'm also a part of the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network as a co-host for You've Got to Be Kidding Me.
We are a TNA history podcast that covers TNA 1 month at a time. We cover all the drama, all the matches, all the Vince Russo nonsense you could ever want in your life.
Have you heard of TNA? I bet you have, but would it be funnier if two people made jokes over it the whole time? Probably.
So if that sounds like fun to you, check it out on this very Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network, and Liam will do bits and whatnot.
Spring is here, a suffering is here. Life is Skittles and life is beer. I think the loveliest time of the year is the spring. I do, don't you? Of course you do. But there's one thing that makes spring complete for me, and makes every Sunday a treat for me. All the world seems in tune on a spring afternoon when we're poisoning pigeons in the park. Every Sunday you'll see my sweetheart and me as we poison the pigeons in the park. When they see us coming, the birdies all try and hide, but they still go for peanuts when coated with cyanide. The sun's shining bright, everything seems alright when we're poisoning pigeons in the park.
Welcome to this week's episode of The Good, the Bad, and the Hungee. Hosted this week only by me, Fred Moreland, because Tyler Fornes is a coward who went to the Senior Bowl, and he cannot stop me from playing that awful song as our theme song. Our guest host this week, however, I'm very pleased to announce, we are joined by Trevor Dame, notoriously of Twitter, and talking about press conferences. Trevor, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I'm glad to be like the huge drop off for you because I looked up your last guest and it was Dave Meltzer. So this is one of the steepest declines in the history of a podcast. So I'm glad to be part of that.
There's that self-deprecation we all know and love. Trevor, you do tweet a lot, so you're right there with Dave. So there's that.
Yeah. God damn it.
But no, I am very excited to have you on because you do something, and while I may question why you do it sometimes, you do tweet through all the post-show press conferences that have become the rage in wrestling ever since AEW debuted and started doing them. And you sure did get a tweet through one last week, didn't you?
Yeah. It's a weird compulsion, and at times I've thought I should stop doing this because a million other people do it, and there's sometimes I would like to move on with my day after an 18-hour pay-per-view, but then there are actually people in and out of wrestling who want me to do it. I don't know why, but yeah, that was yeah, I feel like everyone for once has now talked about a press conference. They've all joined my world with this Triple H one, but yeah, it was not good. I mean, it's funny to see some people kind of discover what the press conferences are. Like, I was reading an article that I wrote about the other day on my Patreon for about Jonathan Snowden wrote a Substack about how he was like, these press conferences aren't for these muckrakers. It's for, the people looking for the last piece of their articles, and he gave an anecdote of how, years ago he got paid by Bleacher Report to do an article. It's like, if there was a big story at that time, I wouldn't have asked about then do either because I was paid to talk about, to do the story about the history of the Royal Rumble. Oh, and it was like, well, there weren't pressers back then, which he admits in the article to his credit. And also, there are a million other opportunities to get media access over the weekends of these big events usually. And also, it's like, if you've ever watched these pressers, it's not people looking to do the finishing touches on paid articles. It's people who have flown themselves out there, who are losing money on this, just asking Triple H, how does it feel to have a great time? And that's it. Like, it's not what some of these people that are just dropping in think they are. And I'm glad people got to see that.
Yeah, you can count me among those who appreciate you doing it because, well, one, it keeps me from having to watch it, and thank you for that. But two, I think you do very good commentary with it, and I think you add good insights. So I do think it's an important thing. I probably would gnaw off my own arm if I try to do it twice, I think. But I think it's great that you do it, honestly.
Well, that's sweet of you to say, but it is awkward, especially when now I have people who are at the pressers who are reading me covering them during the presser and will like tweet to me like, "No, I'm going to ask about that." It's like you're in the middle of it right now. Like you don't have to talk to me.
Oh boy. Now, is this like basically an extension of your like? Did you start doing this because you used to do the TNA, like writing about TNA Mecca and all that stuff? Or
Yeah, this is a bit of Trevor Dame lore. When I was a teenager, I used to post on a message board, and we had an extra private forum or someone would do recaps of the Pro Wrestling Torch for people that didn't want to subscribe to the Pro Wrestling Torch. Back when the Pro Wrestling Torch broke news that it was worth getting a separate Torch subscription on top of the Observer, because there'd be different gaps in each that you'd get. Generally, the Torch was a little bit juicier. Like you always got the impression that Wade would say things that were a little bit more rumory than Dave would, and it was kind of spicy in that sense. And one day, this guy decided, like, I'm not going to recap them anymore. And so I decided, well, I'll do that. For a few months, I just did these recaps where I kind of tried to do a little comedy and try and do the usual stuff. And I don't know, since then, it's been a weird compulsion of me summarizing things and reading and commenting on other people's words as I direct quote them and things like that. So, yeah, I don't know why that hooks into me somehow, but it seems to be a sad recurring theme in my life.
I think it's great. So I really do appreciate your doing it. And I want to ask you about the one this past Saturday with Triple H or Paul Levesque after the Royal Rumble. And, again, I can say that I've only read recaps of it, yours and other people's. And I have to ask, it sounds like you did a very poor job.
Yeah, I think the big thing people were shocked by was how unprepared he seemed.
Yeah, that definitely seemed to be the case.
Because when you think about it, there are a couple of ways to go with a presser, right? Like there's a way to go in when you're facing a huge scandal like this. There's a way of going where you just decide going in, I am going to give a flat no comment anytime I get asked this. I'm going to give you like, if this is an ongoing legal case, I can't comment on it.
The Tony Khan after the CM Punk shit really hit the fan.
Exactly. That's a great question. I appreciate you asking it, Defense.
Yeah.
But then there's the other end of the spectrum where you could have a very set, like one prepared statement that you've carefully worked out with your PR team and lawyers beforehand. Be like, this is our only comment for the night. We're going to lead off with it. We're not going to take questions. This is like what you're going to get. Or
we're distributing printed versions of it.
Yeah. Or there's the third option, which is you can try and really engage. And then there's the fourth option, which Triple H discovered, which I didn't know was a thing that existed, where you can kind of ghoulishly say multiple times, like I just want to focus on the positive. Like we had a great week. Where it would have been better just to say
one of the worst things he could have said. Oh,
because
boy.
Yeah, and instead of saying like it combines the fact that you're not giving information with this kind of tone deaf, like it's not. Instead of saying we can't talk about it, the way he framed it was almost like I just don't want to talk about it. Man. The vibes are off. Like
yeah.
Which is worse, and the fact that
talking about it would mess up my chakras.
Yeah, I mean, I did not see this personally, but I was on some Discord. I saw someone say that I guess Backup Hangman did who has sources, did like a Google group or something, like a Twitter group the day before, and he was saying that apparently Triple H was telling people backstage I'm prepared to take the questions in a way, like let everyone know I'm gonna fall on my shield, I'm gonna take the brunt of this, don't worry. And again, that suggested he's ready for this.
He had a plan.
And then you watch this and he's not.
No. Everything I read just sounded it's a combination of grotesque and also cringe humor that he isn't intentionally creating. This is ignoring the gross aspect of stuff. The way he approached it was almost Larry David this could be, if shifted away from the worst aspects of it, this could be the plot line of an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm.
So I have a question for you. Actually, I hate to interrupt, but I was just going to say, do you give any truck at all to the theory some have floated, which is he is deliberately being left out to dry by TKO because they think they might need a fall guy. Because I'm one of the people that think, like, I don't think they're playing that kind of 4D chess where they're going to make themselves look bad now to help facilitate them possibly cutting him later if need be. But I mean, that's a sign of how bad that presser was, right? Like, some people are thinking, did someone do this to him on purpose? You know?
I honestly don't think so. And one reason I don't think so is because if you'll recall when Vince first stepped down, there's kind of a lot of panic about who would take over the booking, right? Even though Levesque was in house. And I think that if you lose both Vince, who is basically treated as the one person who understands pro wrestling by Wall Street, and then you lose, the guy who at various points was groomed to be his successor, and had been doing it for the past year during a fairly hot period. I can't imagine that they'd be gung ho about dumping both of them and then going to I don't even know who Shawn Michaels or bringing in Eric Bischoff or Vince Russo or something. Now what it's kind of reminiscent to me is something that Triple H would do while he was a wrestler, which is vastly overestimate his own abilities.
You're saying this is the equivalent of like one of his WrestleMania matches where he goes 30 or like 25 minutes, and it's like, well, this would have been good if this was 15.
Yeah, this is the press conference equivalent of, I can guide Vladimir Kozlov through a 25-minute match. This will be just fine.
Yeah,
and that's just the vibe
I can riff on this. I don't need to prep.
Yeah, I'll just I'll call it in the ring.
Yeah,
and he gets out there and it's like, oh no, I can't call it in the ring. And like that's the only thing I can really think of is that that's what happened. I'm kind of shocked that he wasn't sent out there with a prepared statement of some kind or even a list of talking points. And to the point that, like, I have no information indicating this was the case at all. Like, no one's even said anything along these lines. But I do think it would be, once again, very Paul Levesque / Triple H to, like, get that and him, like, just being like, all right, sure, thanks. And then crumpling it up and being like, I got this.
Yeah.
And that's just something I wonder about because it just seemed like an all-time implosion. And the rambling statement on the top where he just, like, everyone thought he was just going to try to filibuster through it. And get through, like, just like talking about Andrade coming back and like, oh, all these great people, Jade Cargill as Dar Ora, thank you, Jordan Grace and TNA. And then the questions came and it's, oh boy, it just reads on paper. And again, I haven't watched it. That's on me. I've been doing actual work this week, shockingly. But it's just reads like a tremendous own goal on his part. And it's really surprising and kind of pathetic, frankly. How do you think people did in the press as far as like the media members?
Not good. I mean, well, let me say this. I'm on the camp. I know there are debating camps. I'm on team. Most wrestlers don't need to be asked about this. Like, especially in the press conference where Triple H was going last. I agree with the people, including, I know there was at least one person who worked that presser who was of the mindset of like, we have to be careful. We don't want to scare Triple H off. Like if we burn a huge question on someone early, there was a consideration. There might be a chance like he shifts, like maybe he gets a cold.
He's notoriously skittery.
Yeah. So, and also, you're probably not going to get a ton from someone like look, in a way, everyone's worthy of asking that question. And I think there are some big stars. Like, I think it was worth getting Cody's perspective.
Yeah, I will defend that one. That one definitely seemed like a good person to ask with a good question. So kudos for that one.
Because he's a top star, and which in some ways carries more weight. And he's a former executive of a different major wrestling company. So asking him about like, hey, what's your perspective on this? That's a unique kind of important perspective that not many people on that roster, almost no one has, so that was valid. But no, the Triple H, he was asked 7 questions and only 3 of them were about the biggest scandal to ever hit WWE ever. I think it's safe to say at this point, the
Yeah.
one that finally brought down Vince McMahon, that necessitated the most important figure in the history of pro wrestling to resign from the company he created.
And not just created, but like ruled with an iron fist for the past 4 decades.
Yeah, and I realized in a way he didn't create it, it was his father, but I mean the modern version. But and 4 of the 7 questions were literally, I swear to God, things like, is this the best era of WWE of all time? Or is it fun to book a roster that is this large, or is it difficult? And those aren't even good questions. If this was the slowest news cycle in wrestling history, I would criticize those questions.
Yeah.
The fact that there were 7 questions and 4 of them were that, yeah, it's horrible. I know there's a defense some people have had where they've said, some people in particular might have trauma, this might be a trigger. And I am very sympathetic to that. Some people aren't. I am. I feel like if you have one specific topic like sexual assault that is a trigger to you, you have personal things, I don't think that should disqualify you from being a reporter. I don't think that should disqualify you from attending one of these pressers. But the thing is, this was a very important availability. This is the only time probably people are during this period are going to get to ask questions of one of the central figures of the story live from the whole world, where clearly he did not have prep. And there were 7 opportunities for that. You had to raise your hand to volunteer to take a question. If you did not feel comfortable asking this one, you could have sat this one person out, this one presser, and let someone else ask a question. You did not have to ask if this was the greatest era of WWE of all time. You could, if you were like, there's something about this where I don't feel comfortable confronting someone about sexual assault, especially a powerful figure. You know what? I get it. But there were other people that are willing to do it, and you took that from them so you could ask a question that meant nothing. And most of the people that were at these pressers, that did ask these questions, I've seen them before. They were at other pressers. They will be at other pressers again. This was not their one time in a lifetime to talk to Triple H.
Yeah. And, I, going back to the trauma thing, I have PTSD, diagnosed with it. And so I am, not only am I sympathetic to the consideration of people with that and everything, but I also literally know firsthand what it's like when it gets activated, when it's triggered. But I also think that if an individual does not feel all right asking one of those questions, that's, obviously fine. But I think at the same time, presuming that everyone in the room or every woman in the room that has that specific situation is kind of, I guess the word I want to look for is, unfair. One of my favorite writers in sports media is Diana, I think it's Moskovitz, who's now for Defector and used to write for Deadspin, and she writes almost exclusively about sexual assault and does a wonderful job about it. And that's not to say everyone has to be her, or it's not like I'm trying to apply a one size fits all situation here, but I'm just saying I think it's also kind of undermining what female reporters, if you kind of say, well, they shouldn't be expected to do, to report on this stuff because they might have had this history as a group, I guess. And I don't know. I just not really big on that, I guess. But yeah, it just seemed like a disaster all around. I will say some people did better than expected. Cameron Hawkins in particular asked a better question than I expected from him. So credit to him. And there's some other ones, of course, Brandon Thurston, who is always the one adult in the room at these. But yeah, it seems like as bad as Levesque was, I think the media didn't exactly outshine him as a collective, and that's very frustrating.
Yeah. Cameron Hawkins, Brandon Thurston, and John Alba. It's worth calling them out by name.
Alba,
those were the 3. And Nick Hausman, asked Cody Rhodes the question about.
Yeah, that was if you're just going to get to ask Cody something, then that's the right question and right person to ask.
Yeah, and so Yeah, and it's the one thing I will say, which I think is like, I think Brandon Thurston, he wrote a tweet recently, like a long tweet about,
Yeah.
encouraging people to ask the hard questions and doing it far more eloquently in far fewer words than I typically do with that kind of stuff. But the one thing I will say is he kind of bolstered people by being like I've asked tough questions, questions I know WWE wouldn't want to hear at every one of these pressers, and I keep getting invited back. So like the impression of like you should not be afraid either. But I was kind of thinking, to be fair, Brandon, not everyone else there is Brandon Thurston. Like Brandon Thurston has some kind of like magic dust where he has such respect. Like he gets to both companies' pressers. He always asks like reasonably tough, incisive questions, and they always call on it. Like not only do they still invite to the pressers, they
Search him out.
Yeah, they never ignore him. They always make like, and I don't know if everybody like I'm not saying I think reporters should be brave. No, like I completely agree with the thrust of his thing, but I do think I think some other people wouldn't get the Brandon Thurston treatment. I think you have to kind of have a level of credibility, that goes, what, we really need to keep calling on this guy. We have a good rapport with him. He's tough but fair. I think if Joe Rando dressed up like Hulk Hogan at the show asked that question, he might not be asked to come back again. That's just a hunch. There's a difference, but
yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's I mean, he's got the gravitas, he's got the skills. He's able to ask these hard questions but do them in a way that isn't over the top, I reckon, or in some like inherently disrespectful way that is just going to completely make people unwilling to have him there. So yeah, I mean, he's like, at what he does, he I think relative to what he does, you could argue is the best in wrestling media at all.
Yeah, we need more of them. Absolutely, we need more Brandon Thurstons.
Yeah, we need a lot more of him and less of the just the reactionary tribalist people, I guess, which includes unfortunately some aspects of wrestling media. So it's a very frustrating situation.
And the one last thing I will just say about this is, I have no problems with soft quote unquote media, like the people that are just going to do light articles. It's just that they take up 99% of the space and oxygen, and like a presser is very suited for the hard media. Like it's not suited to get your in-depth interview that you're going to use as your main source for like a long article piece about, say, what it was like for Cody Rhodes to win his second Royal Rumble in front of his family. But it is good about putting someone on a spot about like a recently developing story live in front of everybody. And I feel like when people are like, oh, like, are you saying that there shouldn't be a world where someone like Denise Salcedo can do what she does? No, there's absolutely a place, like she does it well. There's a place for her, but there's 99 places for what they do. This is like the one place where maybe the other kinds of people could get their kind of work done. And it feels like they have to fight to even get a little bit of the time there. So that's what's frustrating to me.
Yeah, those questions are kind of like if someone went to like a press conference after the assassination of JFK and was trying to ask Jackie O like where she got her blood-covered suit. It's kind of like this isn't the time or place. We got bigger fish to fry here. But yeah,
how nice was that car? It was that parade. I mean, look, one bad thing happened, but otherwise, pretty good parade. If one bad float, you're not gonna criticize it.
What do you think about Dallas?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, what a time. And I think there was the Shawn Michaels NXT presser yesterday, which I did not manage to catch anything of at all, but what I did read afterwards and listen to afterwards seemed to indicate that maybe the questions asked to Levesque gave some other people a backbone to ask more questions. Now, I also think the concentration of serious reporters is higher with the phone calls rather than the in-person ones, because the people that are trying to do this for real probably are like looking at their money and trying to not just waste money to travel down to a pay-per-view where they may not even get called on.
No, I think that's a great point because I do think bravery encourages more bravery. I've seen at these pressers that when one person asks a serious question, often you'll get like a flurry of serious questions afterwards that I don't think you would have gotten. Like once someone breaks the seal, and also maybe even like a phone presser, like it's easier sometimes to ask someone a difficult question over the phone that is when
Yes,
you're feet away from them. That's just a fact of life. So that
exactly.
I was shocked at how they followed up. That they actually asked him pretty tough personal questions. So yeah, I was actually very pleasantly surprised by that.
Yeah. And, it sounds like Michaels wasn't as poorly performing at that his presser, but also it feels like he didn't really get prepared either. So,
Yeah.
which is kind of astonishing. Like, it's a little more understandable, though not really, when Levesque has his 2 days after, but when it's been like almost a week after, and Michaels is like, oh, this was harder than I expected. You're like, buddy, you should have expected this. You should have
Fred,
expected
I
this
would
to
just
suck.
say after the Shawn Michaels promo with CM Punk and NXT, I will never be surprised again if Shawn Michaels is unprepared for something.
Yeah.
Like, never again.
Oh boy. Well, with all that lovely, conversation pieces, do you think that there's any chance Vince scrapes his way back in? Because I think if you had asked me last week, like after like Sunday or Monday of this past week, I probably would have said there was a puncher's chance on it, like maybe 10 or 20%, just because, he's like a junior Donald Trump where nothing seems to stick to him, regardless of what he does. And there's that baked in thing that the media just looks down on pro wrestling and doesn't pay attention to it because it's a carny business. And like, yeah, I get it. But at the same time, like, he's been connected to all these awful things for years and years and years, and nothing really seriously happened to him. And then we started getting like the media continuing to pay attention to this, and it was like, oh, this actually may mean something. Like when Tim Marchman, another very good writer, co-authored a piece or two for Vice this week. The Wall Street Journal continued to report on this. I think that this may actually have been the end of Vince McMahon.
Yeah, it's tough because I think you're right. I do think this is the end, but I hesitate sometimes saying that because I'm like the kid who's touched the stove too many times because Matt Feuerstein, my co-host on Through the Years, I was like when the original scandals for this thing broke in 2022, I was emphatic in like a private chat with Matt, like Vince is done. And Matt was like, yeah, I think he's coming back. You don't think there's a chance? And I was like, no, he's done. Look at this. It's in the Wall Street Journal. And he came back. And now I really do feel like he's done, but I'm scared to say that because I feel like, he's wiggled out of every single jam of his life.
It's like the Trump tweet.
Yeah, I mean, but at the same time, he doesn't have the power to like force himself in anymore. And I think the big thing is he's been through this once before recently. Like even let's say Vince got this quietly settled very quickly and no one else raised their voice, or let's say he even somehow won this case, if Jerry McDivitt crawled out of the grave, and I know he's not dead, and defended him and saved him and proved it all wrong, even let's say that, I feel like TKO is probably in the position now where this has happened enough times in recent history where they're like, even if you're like quote unquote through this, we're going to look really bad if we take you back and this hits a third time. Like you can't, because there's no deniability if you invite Vince back, no matter what happens with this case. Like if it happens again, you can't say, oh, there was no signs, honestly, there are plenty of signs that he shouldn't have been able to come back this time, but he strong-armed his way because he had the power to. And I think that's more than anything is why he won't come back, is because he's just out of options where the people can support him and look like, hey, you don't believe in second chances, you don't believe in having good faith, there's too much now. They can never do that, make that argument anymore.
And he's out of trump cards, I think. I don't think he's got anything left to play. Like when he came back last time, it was because he was like, well, I have all the stock and I will ruin this company. That's the thing he's always done. He's always run WWE as his personal fiefdom. And even when they went public, like they did not do the thing where, okay, we're really going to focus on maximizing profit, our investors' profit, like they wanted to, obviously, but like that was never the top priority. The top priority was always I'm Vince McMahon, damn it. And That's why things like this happened, because they just had that culture around there where everyone was a yes man for him and there was no one trying to stop him from anything. And he probably could have shot someone backstage, and there would have been enough sycophants around him where they would have all right, Vince, I'll go get a rug. We'll get the body in there and I'll drive it out to the Jersey swamps. Don't worry, Vince.
And the other big thing I think that's changed too is, for so long the thought always was, when Vince was in his 50s, 60s, or whatever, the idea was, particularly in his 60s or even early 70s, the idea is, oh, Vince is probably bulletproof because, one, he owns the company, but also there was this this thought that people would be terrified that if Vince left, the stock would crash, because there's this impression that Vince has encouraged that, he's the one person that understands wrestling. He's the one person that can run a successful wrestling company. And the last few years, you've seen him, he, at least publicly, out of creative. The company is in its most successful period in a long time. He's basically there in TKO at this point. He was, before he stepped down, in kind of name only, and maybe to have some Saudi connections to help things here or there. Well, his name value is nothing now. His name value is a negative. But the things that would have protected him would have been well, you need Vince to run things because this company won't be successful without him running things. Well, that's been proven in the modern era that they don't need him running things. In fact, It probably will run smoother without him.
Yeah, and also on top of all that, he is 78. So, even if you posed a scenario about 5 minutes ago where he, was able to disprove the accusations and everything and walk away scot-free, that'll take years to do it if he does fight everything.
Yeah.
So we'd be probably in his 80s, so 81, 83, who knows? And at that point, was TKO really going to be clambering after, one presumes, some years of at least decent success, or at least being too big to fail in wrestling?
Yeah.
To be well, we got to bring back the 83-year-old with a history of rape accusations and bad booking decisions and all this.
Yeah, exactly. You're not getting potential decades of service from him at that
right.
point.
Well, this is an AEW podcast, so let's talk about AEW some. And I think the biggest story going on in AEW right now is the attendances for their shows are pathetic for the most part. Now, of course, the Revolution pay-per-view is doing very well, sold out at, I believe, over 15,000 in Greensboro. But their TV tapings for the next few weeks, still awful. Most of these are, there's all but 2, 3 actually are under 3,000, and 2 of them that aren't are 3064 and 3128. And there's 4 in a row that are under 2,000. We've got a 1246 in Henderson, Nevada. We've got a 1784 in Cedar Park, Texas, an 1817 in Tulsa, and a 1393 for a double taping in Huntsville, Alabama. And these are just brutal numbers.
Yeah. Yeah, it's insane. It's funny because you're hearing there are 18,000 reasons people are now speculating about why the attendance is so bad, and a lot. I'm sure we'll go over many of them. A lot of them are valid, but there's so many plausible reasons. It's almost hard to pick what is the reason that's really driving this, because you can come up with 5 different reasons off the top of your head that could be plausible why it's this low. But I think one thing that people have been pointing to that I would consider right off the bat would be the idea that AEW was, in recent months, giving a lot of comps and a lot of late, right before the show, discounts and things like that. And those are kind of like the fad diet of the pro wrestling world, where they work really well initially, but then you get this huge bounce back, right?
Yeah.
I watched my parents with the old, we're just going to eat the beet soup diet for 2 months. And then 4 months later, they lose 20 pounds, and 4 months later, they're 30 pounds heavier. And it's the same thing here, where apparently, when they've shifted recently and decided, we're going to stop doing that. But the problem is you've now trained your audience that don't buy tickets till late, because you'll get a comp or you'll get a real good discount. And then what happens when you wait for that discount and the discount doesn't come? You've trained yourself to expect that. And you might go, you know what? I don't really need to go to this collision then. I thought I was going to get a free ticket or a real cheap ticket. You know what? Whatever. It didn't come. Maybe next time.
Yeah, I think that's a major one. But also, I just don't think I mean, they're obviously not talking people through the door. I think the past month or so of, the post MJF run has been pretty good for the most part. There's been some dynamites that have been like very, mediocre, but it's all been pretty good. There hasn't been anything that's been like really awful in that time period. Maybe a couple matches that were disappointments, but yeah, I just think, you know, like they very loudly announced what's coming next Dynamite. Like they pushed that really hard, and I think that's a reaction to just kind of, for a few weeks there being like, well, that people will be here and we're AEW, so obviously you'll give us money. And then, those dates come and they, the attendances are 1,500 or whatever, and they're like, oh, our presumed plan of just getting money is not working. We need to adjust.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because the thing, hasn't the stated AEW theory always been that by kind of piecemealing out these matches over the week online, we kind of keep the ourselves in the conversation all week long, where other people have been arguing the opposite, which is you really want to give people time to look forward to this and time to plan out and buy tickets. Well, yeah, like you mentioned, clearly on that Dynamite, I was kind of surprised they by the end of that night, they basically gave you the entire card.
Yeah, for sure.
A week, 7 days at a time, which is not typically something they always do. And the ironic thing is they're doing it for their best. Like looking at your form sheet here, they're doing that's their best attended event in the next couple of months. Yeah. So, I mean, in a way, it doesn't need to, I mean, in a way, I think you should reward those people, and it's a good practice to get into no matter what. But it's kind of funny because it's the one that's actually above 4,000 tickets sold that they're actually doing this theory of like, hey, let's just give you the whole card, big matches. It's the biggest Dynamite they've probably done this year so far. And yeah, so all right, here's a question for you.
Sure.
Because it's my show now, clearly. But well, I am the co-host. I thought it was going to be yes, but there's a different responsibility, Fred, if I'm the co-host.
You got to step up.
But what I ask you is, so here's another thing that you've heard. There's been rumors about, which is they're going to start booking just more of the major markets and less of the smaller markets. These
Meltzer mentioned that last week.
But part of me wonders, is that also going to be like the fad diet thing, where initially, if you just lean on your strongest markets more often, that's going to give you a boost, but you're going to burn them out quicker, right?
Yeah, and I think you definitely saw that with Chicago last year, I believe, and a bit in 2021 as well, where, they were like, hey, CM Punk's back, and Chicago was like, yeah, baby, we're in, and they were like, hey, we're back with CM Punk again. They were still excited, and then after like the sixth time, they're like, oh, I think I've had enough CM Punk.
Yeah, it's the old, you can shear a sheep, 100 times, but you can only, kill it once for the tasty meat. I've never eaten sheep. But yeah, and I feel like sometimes AEW, they get a little thirsty for like, oh, we had a great attendance here. Let's really drill down on this. And it's like, I'd rather have a market where I could attend it once a year and draw like a really big house than like milk it dry like 3 times a year. And then it becomes just a middling territory, a middling market for years to come.
Yeah. And, at the same time, there's only so many places in the United States, even though it's a massive country, obviously. And there's plenty of like, what I consider major league cities where you have, a major league sports team, and, if you look at the list here, I forget if Cedar Park is is that a Houston suburb or is that a Dallas suburb?
Brad, I'm Canadian.
You are Canadian.
You guys are.
It is Austin.
I have
Texas.
no idea how your voodoo works.
Very well. Don't check that. But yeah, like they are hitting some like, I mean, Tulsa and Huntsville aren't like small cities by any stretch, but they are on the smaller end. They're not Phoenix or, Henderson, Nevada, which is a stand-in for Las Vegas. And they're definitely not Toronto or Ottawa or even Quebec City. So I don't know. It's going to take time for them to implement that, but I do think that, I think back to early on in like 2019 when AEW first started, that one of its hottest markets per capita for the pay-per-views, and then when they ran like the 3rd or 4th episode of Dynamite there, was Charleston, West Virginia, which is 100% not a large city. It's the largest city in West Virginia, but it's West Virginia. I mean, the West Virginia itself has a population of like 1.3 million. But I mean, it did really well there, and I was actually in attendance for that show, and I remember the Young Bucks came out afterwards, and they're like, "Yeah, we remember Sold Out when it ran here back in the '90s for WCW, and we're going to run a pay-per-view here someday." And this pretty full arena was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And then I'm not even sure if they've ever gone back, to be honest. I think they did once, but and it's you gotta. I think blaming it on the size of the market rather than what you're doing to get people in the shows is a flawed and short-sighted strategy, because, if you just start running the Phoenixes and Seattles and Miamis and, Chicago's and New York's and LA's exclusively, then, but you don't change anything else, then I think you're going to end up with like this, Dynamite we have next week where it's Phoenix and you do draw 4,000 people for it, but like, within the realm of what you should expect for Phoenix, that is probably on the lower end.
Yeah.
And I think that you do need to space these out some, and you got to hit the second tier cities once in a while. And I don't know. I feel like AEW's the like you mentioned earlier, the tweet the stuff out over the week. I think that works for TV, but I think we're seeing that there's a loss of faith for whatever reason that, people that pay to attend are going to get that kind of thing, the suit, what they want from buying a ticket. And it's kind of on them to figure that out.
And I do think there's a lot of validity to the argument some have made, which is, wrestling is a star-driven business. AEW in its first year or two, it could just sell it on the brand of you're coming to see AEW.
Oh, yeah.
But generally, wrestling fans, they want to see specific people. They want to see stars that seem special and above it, not just, oh, no, you have wrestling with a brand you like. And unless the brand is incredibly hot, like WWE could probably get away with that. But ironically, they typically, they're a safer bet in the sense if you go to a Raw, you're going to see Cody Rhodes. That's the example everyone uses. He's going to do either a promo or a match. And if you go to an AEW event, you don't know if you're even going to see the world champion. There were occasionally weeks where even MJF, when he was champion, wasn't there. You never knew what you were going to get. You're going to see something. There's a standard of quality. You're going to see some star, but if you have a specific favorite or someone that would draw you, there's no guarantee. And so that's probably a big issue. So the one thing I'm going to ask, because again, I'm co-host now. Tyler's never coming back. I've cut his breaks. I hate to break it to you.
I hate to report this, but Tyler has gone to the Senior Bowl, which to watch what I can only assume are very old people play football, and he's never coming back.
Yeah. That's the equivalent of when they tell you that your dog went to a farm while you were on vacation. Like, yes, Fred, Tyler went to the Senior Bowl. He's having a great time forever. But what I would say is, what I want to ask you, because I've been thinking about this. So what do you think about the idea that the long Ring of Honor tapings at the end kill people? Because on one end I can see it, but part of me feels like weird, like, because it's like they always have at the end of the show, generally, like if they're boring, you don't have to stay. like especially by now, you should know going in, if you've ever seen results for any of these shows, that like, oh, Collision is done. There's going to be 18 hours of Ring of Honor matches now. Like, you don't have to stay for, like, the idea of like, I mean, I'm sure it has burned some people up, but I just try to imagine this audience of thousands of people that are like, we want to leave, but we have to support Gringo Loco. Well, like, there are people that leave these events all the time. The idea, like, you get a full night without seeing the Ring of Honor stuff. But I mean, I would try maybe paring it back, absolutely. But I just try and put myself in their shoes and feel like if the show was getting too long, especially if it's like non-important stuff, I would just go, well, they've given me more than I needed. I don't have to watch all of this right now. I like Castle. I don't have to see him wrestle 4 hours into this night.
I don't really buy that argument from people, because my reasoning is like, okay, so their whole argument is you go to a show and then after the good parts of the show are over, there's this interminable Ring of Honor taping, and everyone like has to stay there for the entire time apparently, and then they either die of old age and can't return to the next show, or else they are just like, well, I'm not doing that again, and decide not to buy tickets. I don't know why these hypothetical people don't just walk out, like you said. That doesn't really add up to me.
Yeah, it would be
So
different if it was like, we're going to give you a Bryan Danielson, Kenny Omega dark match, but you have to watch 2 hours of Ring of Honor. It'll start at 12, the 20 after midnight, because you have to watch
yeah,
this Ring of Honor take first. But they never do that. Like, it's like, here's Collision. The big thing is done. Here's some other stuff.
yeah. You now get to watch a bunch of AEW Dark, but it's red and black themed. It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't see why that would be the case. I think it's combining a valid argument, which is that the way Ring of Honor is done doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And then it's like going, okay, ergo, A equals B, therefore 75. You're like, okay, the math doesn't work. Now, I do want to ask you about this because you are a co-host of not just this podcast now, but through the years, which is your Ring of Honor recap podcast, where you go back and watch every show, regardless of if it's held in a tent outside or if it's the boring suffocation, which I just listened to this week.
Okay.
But you, you have a long history of watching Ring of Honor. And I wanted to ask you, like, what do you think about what they are doing with Ring of Honor as a product and as a brand in 2023, 2024?
It's tough because on one hand, like, it's hard to, there's a level of being critical you can never go to, or at least I can't, because it's like, the alternative would have been WWE buys the library and the company dies. So it's like, no matter what you think, whether Ring of Honor is not being properly utilized or some value is being squandered, it's like, well, it's not dead.
Right.
It's crossing one bar, one very real possibility. It is alive in some form, but yeah, they basically have turned it into a somewhat upgraded dark. It's been a fun home for Athena to really get to rule the roost and really have just a great run, which is a double-edged sword, because in one way it's like, it's nice that she gets to have this be the big fish in a small pond, but on the other hand, it's kind of sad that she's doing this incredible work that's getting seen by such a small fraction of a potential audience. But it's weird because the Ring of Honor pay-per-views under Tony Khan are like this. I think they're honestly a safer bet than the AEW pay-per-views in terms of they're going to be great shows so far. Because you have never had one where like a big weird angle has derailed it the way occasionally an AEW pay-per-view has. But yeah, the TV is, it's a souped up dark, and it's hard to evaluate that because it's like, you are getting these incredible shows 3-4 times a year, but then you get this. It's there are things you could do with Ring of Honor, and it's just the idea of, for a company that constantly seems like they are so stressed and their attention is so divided, and they're already like just you always get the vibe that AEW is just everything's getting sealed and put a bow on like minutes before airtime.
It's
The
the
idea of
Muppet
saying,
Show.
yeah, the idea of saying, hey, let's do more separate tapings. Let's put more thought into something else that isn't your main thing. It feels like a kind of a heavy ask. But yeah, there is, like, honestly, if you talk about things that maybe someone, Tony could hand off, maybe that is something he could hand off to somebody. But then it's a matter of finding someone you really trust that has a vision, all that stuff. I know there was always those rumors of Cody could have done Ring of Honor. Who knows if those rumors are true or not? But
Sure.
could you, to find someone like that where it's like, this is going to be its own thing. It's going to be this guy, someone else's playground, and it's going to free me up. It's going to be just AEW. I'm now not going to have a separate binder for my ROH booking of 12 matches every week. I don't know. So yeah, it's hard to judge. In a way, the Ring of Honor I really loved. Like, there's been Ring of Honor I've enjoyed throughout its history, but the Ring of Honor I really loved kind of died in 07, 08. So it's, I'm not feeling like this incredible, like, oh, they're killing something I've had a 20-year love affair with. Like, no, I really loved Ring of Honor from its inception to like 07, 08. So it's a little easier for me to swallow whatever's happening to it at this point.
Very fair. I think, early on, when we pretty early in the run of this podcast when that Ring of Honor deal was announced, and before Collision was a thing. Tyler and I were like, well, maybe we'll talk about Ring of Honor like every week, and then I think we both tried to watch like the first episode, and it was apparent what it was going to be, and we're like, no, we're good. Not going to worry about that. So
yeah, the number of people that like subscribed for 1 month of Honor Club and then we're like, how do I cancel this? Was probably pretty sizable.
Yeah, bad enough they just put the last pay-per-view on there, I think, in a pretty apparent attempt to get more subscribers, and deciding that it wasn't worth the whatever they were getting off of pay-per-view. But speaking of, terrible transition, but possibly not worth it. Collision rating this past week when they went head up against the Royal Rumble, that did not go too well. They had both their worst overall rating and their worst key demo rating. 300,000 overall and a 0.06 in the 1849. I think if Rampage didn't outpace it this past week, it was pretty damn close. And they went with not a huge show, but like a strong one, with that cage main event. I mean, both were just the all-time worst for the show, including whenever it's been preempted, which is usually the easy, bottom of the list cases. But just a rough rating. And I honestly think this is just kind of you got to take your medicine situation. I think that they're just kind of stuck with a couple times a year they're going to go up against the Royal Rumble or WrestleMania or some huge sporting event on a Saturday night, and they're just going to get murdered. And I think that this is one of those nights, and I don't think it's really indicative of anything beyond the attention of their audience getting spread out too thin.
Yeah, there's a phrase that kind of goes through my head where for some reason, if you want to know if I do anything other than tweet about wrestling on Twitter and then disappear for a few days, well, when I disappear for a few days, it's because I'm indulging my other hobby, watching British trivia shows on YouTube that I understand half the questions of. But there's one, Richard Osman's House of Games, and Richard Osman is a lovely British chap who he is a huge Fulham supporter, so there's your AEW connection. I don't know if this is a common British phrase or what. I've only heard it from him, so forgive me if this is a very common phrase. He always goes, "It's a good day to have a good day." And I feel like if I could sum up Collision's time slot, it's like it's a bad time slot to be in a bad place with, because if you're a hot promotion, you can overcome, facing heavy competition. But when you're a cold promotion, you're going to get hammered so many weeks because it's like the worst possible time slot when you're cold, because you're always facing a sports game, a UFC thing, a WWE event. And it's like, it is not, if there's ever a hesitation in your fan base of like, you know what, this product no longer seems essential to me right now. Like more than probably half the weeks of the year, they're being given a different option during that time slot to like, oh, here's something exciting that you could watch.
Yeah, and I think you just can't give up on it either, because, I think the idea that, well, you're going to get massacred on this night, so you just give like an awful show, I think that just does way more damage than just having one bad rating, a blip on the chart. I think, not only do you damage, like instead of a 300,000, you do a 220 with a 0.03 or something, like even more embarrassing numbers. But you would also, I think, one, encourage people to break the habit of watching every Saturday, which is something you are desperate to avoid. And two, I think whatever market you're running in that night, I think you do really big, you do noticeable damage to the next time you come into town. If you, pay the not discounted amount now, especially with that coming or present, I guess. And you go there and like the main event is the Guns versus, Alex Reynolds and John Silver or something. All fine performers and everything, but not exactly marquees or names on the marquee you want to see. Yeah, I think the next time you come through town, you're like, all right, we're going to run a totally normal Dynamite. And I think your fans are just going to be like, no, I don't trust you.
Yeah. And then I think that should be the goal, which is, even though DVR ratings usually, especially if they're like a significant time after the airing, don't factor into the ratings. And so therefore they're not really important to advertisers. Therefore, they're not really important to the networks in many respects. In some respects that's changed. But like, I think the goal just to keep that relationship with your audience strong should be, yeah, we're going to get a bad rating, but we're going to put on a show where you're not going to watch Collision on Saturday, but you're damn sure going to DVR it on Sunday. Like you're going to watch it when you wake up tomorrow. And if you make a show where the fans aren't even going to feel like it's worthy of doing that, that would be a big issue, I think, too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and of course, not just with the Royal Rumble, but they had in the NBA, the Lakers against the Warriors, the two of their marquee teams. You had a Kentucky versus Arkansas men's basketball game, and you also had a UConn versus Notre Dame women's basketball game. So it's hard to get a bigger women's game. And, all three of those outperformed Collision that night. And not a surprise, I think.
Yeah.
A couple more just quick notes in the news section. Jim Ross had surgery for cancer on his right hip on yesterday, February 1st, and the surgery reportedly went well per Meltzer in the Observer newsletter. I presume that's skin cancer and not something else, but best wishes to him. And then Wardlow nearly pulled a Joe Lanza there with the Wardlaw. He said on social media that he is fine after appearing to tweak his knee to some extent on Dynamite when he was powerbombing Commander, and then limping everywhere immediately afterwards. In a very interesting, just a weird thing to see on TV. So hopefully he is well as I use that word in two different meanings. Everyone loves that when that happens in audio. Trevor, I wanted to ask you about Wardlow. Do you think he's salvageable at this point?
Maybe, but it's almost like there are so many people I would try and they're so one of the AEW's big problems to me that I've harped on for years since pretty much the beginning is they try and push too many people and they divide their times, and that's why you get a lot of these stop-start pushes. Like everyone in AEW gets a turn with a push. They just very few get a sustained, committed push. But so I guess the thing with is like you could rehab Wardlow, but like, do you want to do the work of rehabbing him or take that energy to someone that maybe starts at zero? And yeah, and that's the thing. Yeah, he seems so cold now, and he's one of those AEW characters where he doesn't seem to have any advancement, even just from a kayfabe sense. Like, people are talking about how like Orange Cassidy is right where he was after that, that big title reign, and now he's back in the same position. It's not quite as hot. Like Wardlow had this storyline where he feuded with MJF and it was really hot. Then he had a feud with Samoa Joe where he lost like this hair that he said was so important to him. Then he never grew it back. His hair looks awful now. And now he's pining to feud with MJF again and seems to be on a collision course with Samoa Joe again. And neither seem as hot. Like it's another guy where he feels like he was hot. Then he was paused for a long time. And now they're trying to put him to diminishing returns in the exact things that he once was successful with, which rather than find something new for him, and even the idea that he's in the same story that they're already doing with a different stable on night one of the formation of that stable, Adam Cole's like, you're going to win the title one day and you're going to hand it to me. And then, is Wardlow happy with that? They're already doing that with the Christian Cage Luchasaurus thing. So it's like, angle. Yeah, he's wearing his old clothes and he's wearing other people's clothes. Like he needs new shirts. He needs new clothes. And
a new haircut.
Yeah, definitely.
The Sport Cuts number 3 isn't doing it for him. But yeah, it's kind of sad because I'm with you. I think that they might be able to if they really put the effort in, but frankly, I don't know if it's worth the effort. I don't know if it's worth the investment. And you mentioned stop and start pushes. They kind of did that with Swerve Strickland last year, where I think I came on here on the first show of 2023 and was like, he is ready to be a world champion this year. And obviously, if they wanted MJF to be the champ the entire year, they're not going to do that. But they just kind of let Swerve disappear for 5 months, and then they brought him back. And thankfully, the Adam Page feud was their best of the year, more or less. And it worked, but it's still. That's just a tough situation. And I just don't know if there's any rectifying it. But, that is kind of the story of Wardlow right now in AEW. He looked like a promising guy, and then, stuff outside of his control just, kind of kneecapped him, and part of the pun, I guess. But yeah, I mean, it's it shows that so much in wrestling is timing. I think if you went back to the Steve Austin King of the Ring win and everything, if you instead were like, well, we'll give you the big win to get you on the come up, Steve, but we'll do it 6 months later, like who knows how wrestling history would have turned out. But
you know what is on my show, for some reason I love making food analogies. Here's a classic Trevor Dame food analogy. Pushing wrestlers is like reheating leftovers, where you could probably do it once and get away with it, but if you keep reheating it, like if you're reheating the same dish like 3 or 4 times, you're getting into really dicey territory. It's probably not going to work out for you.
Yeah.
And I think fans will accept the idea of, oh, this guy. Sometimes even if there are some guys where if you miss the window the first time, it's never the same. So sometimes you can't even reheat it once. It's not even like pizza. But there are times where it is like pizza. You could reheat it once. But there are other times where every time you kind of let someone cool off and reheat them again, you're kind of teaching the fans, don't get too invested in this wrestler, because as hot as they're about to get, they're probably going to disappear for a while again. They're going to be fade to the background again. And so they're not going to invest as much because they know, oh, my heart's just going to get broken again. Yeah. And so, you can pull that trick once sometimes. I think once you get into 2-3 times, and with a guy like Wardlow, maybe even once or twice is too much, who knows?
I think it seems like Wardlow is more French fries than pizza.
Exactly. AEW needs an air fryer. That would solve all their problems, clearly.
But that's it for the news. So what's left is to go through Collision and Dynamite. And Trevor, I got to tell you, this was a week of 2 shows where one of them was good and one of them was not so much.
Yeah, it's funny, the last couple Dynamites, like, they've been okay. Here's a perfect example of, in AEW, everyone gets a chance to gets their turn on a push. Like, it's just really bizarre to me, like, some of the business is going down for AEW, but there was some hot momentum off of the end of last year with the Continental Classic. So, what you need to really follow that up in January, a mini push for Jeff Hardy. Let's bring in Rob Van Dam to main event. Like, and Rob Van Dam did not look bad, but it's like, of all the stuff you're giving bandwidth to right now, to follow up, to try and I feel like it's one of those things where I'm almost harder watching it because of the attendance, which normally I'm not. But it's like a good show, low attendance, sometimes even has a bit of a folksy charm to it, like that Collision kind of did this week, where it's like, oh, this crowd's small, but they're reacting pretty loud. It's kind of a throwback feeling, kind of feels like classic WCW. But It's like, you watch Dynamite, it's like very low attendance show in near blackness with a well past their prime Jeff Hardy and Rob Van Dam in prominent matches, and you're like, oh, this feels like TNA.
Yeah.
And, it's funny how, just who you utilize in front of a small crowd can completely change the vibe of a show, from, oh, this is kind of charming to, oh God, this is really morbid.
Yeah. I think that if they used either one of Jeff Hardy and Rob Van Dam, it would have been much better. And in fact, I would have preferred if they used Rob Van Dam, frankly, because of the two, one of them is mobile and it's not Jeff Hardy. But I think I think they really put themselves in a tough position when they signed Jeff Hardy. And I think that's unfortunately, because they were a fantastic actor in their prime and, very important to wrestling history and everything. But I think it's hard to kind of understate that. I think this is an example of subtraction by addition, where they signed someone probably not cheaply and are not getting a positive return on that investment. And especially when the Hardys are going on social media every once in a while and like saying, oh, I'm not happy with my push. I should be on Dynamite every week. And, I'm like, do you watch your tapes back?
Yeah.
Are you cognizant of what's happening here? But let's talk about Collision first, which was I thought a really rock solid show, and then with a great main event. I thought that was just tremendous stuff. But everything underneath it on the show was like perfectly solid. Every match I had in like that 3.5 to 3/4 star range, outside of the one squash. I even liked the Eddie Kingston Willie Mack match where Willie Mack appeared to try to like end his career prematurely. With just a terribly botched standing moonsault, or I think it was supposed to be a shooting star press actually, where he just kind of rotated half the way and then stopped and landed right on his dome. Apparently completely fine, fortunately. Thank God for that, because that could have been really bad. I know people were really high on the Bryan Danielson Yuji Nagata match, and I definitely didn't hate it or anything, but I thought it was like a nice 3 3/4 star match. And I saw a bunch of people like 4.5, 4.25, and I'm like, it didn't hit with me like that.
Yeah, I wouldn't put. I definitely would not put 4.5. I feel like it's a good match no matter who you are, but it gets like an extra 1/4 to half star probably, if depending on how much fondness you have for the Bryan Danielson like dream retirement tour, where Tony
Yeah.
Khan's giving him everything he wants, and knowing that Bryan Danielson like years and years ago in interviews like really put over Eugene the guys like, oh, this is like the best guy I've been in the ring with at that point. And one of those matches of like the clock is ticking. Did you ever think you'd actually see this before either of these guys is done? And that it's still as good as it is, considering especially Nagata's age. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, I'm kind of lucky to see this. And even though it's not, I would not put it as like, 4.5. I think that's a gross inflation. There's an extra charm of, I can't believe it's nice that we get this,
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I'm not complaining about the existence of the match or anything. Like, I enjoyed watching it. I'm glad it happened. I just was a little surprised because, I'm generally considered a generous star rater. And I found myself on the low end with that match. And that was a bit of a, am I okay? Do I need to do a check for a stroke kind of situation? But, that was lovely. I really enjoyed the Commander Orange Cassidy match. I thought that was a sneaky 4-star match, actually. I thought they had a great post commercial breaks segment. And one thing I'm going to put over that I've been down on the whole Timeless Tony gimmick all year, but I will say that I think we finally saw how this gimmick could work 100%, which is her cutting that promo. And she's being a little goofy, playing up the act a little bit, but she actually has stuff to say underneath of all the dressing. And this was like the first time I felt like there was actual direction with her character since we got Timeless Tony. And I thought this was easily better than anything else they've done with that gimmick. And I actually enjoyed this segment quite a bit.
It's really weird. It'll be interesting to see if they can keep threading that needle in any way, because
it's hard.
Because if you look at this Deonna Purrazzo feud, they're doing it on the Deonna Purrazzo end. It's this very personal, very grounded, like, here's our real history. We got matching tattoos. Here's pictures of Toni Storm when she was a normal human being. And then on the other end, you got someone that's talking about anal beads, and it's like, I don't know how you come to a middle ground there. Between the person that thinks it's the 1940s and the person that's trying to do just like a modern story that's more about real events. I don't know how it's going to turn out. I don't know.
Yeah, my big complaint has been for this entire time is that, like, okay, so you want to make Timeless Tony, and I think that's stuck being at least halfway to a comedy character, if not like completely devoted to it. That would be fine, but you're doing it on top of your women's division. Okay, that's kind of a tough position in the first place. But in the second, like, throughout, I think that with this character is they haven't had ideas for it. Like, they've had the overarching idea, but there hasn't been a, okay, then what kind of, discussion that led to anything that worked. They kind of got to the point where she was just doing, wacky shit for the sake of it. Like, they just had her, all right, I guess, Tony, we're going to have you eat a lemon with a peel on still. And that'll be your big moment in this segment. And it's like, yeah, but you're not talking people in the door with that,
Yeah.
I can't imagine that there's that many people that are like rubbing their hands together and going, well, that wacky Tony Storm. Last time she put a metal pan down her pants for her hip attack. I can't wait to see what she does next. It hasn't been a positive for the most part. And it's very frustrating because with Jamie Hayter out, she's probably their best women's, wrestler in ring. That is saddled with this gimmick that is actively a deterrent to having great matches. And, it'd be one thing if this was, I don't know, let's say someone with the in-ring capabilities of Ruby Soho, or some of that level, which is, a solid enough worker, but not like a high level one, not someone that you can build the division around. So you go, all right, we'll smoke and mirrors this a little bit and give this person the gimmick. But instead you gave it to your most competent worker. You're not just competent, but great worker outside of, the injured Jamie Hayter. And I don't know. It's a very odd situation. And there's all the reporting that like Tony Khan is gung-ho with his character and everything. And it's a disappointment because I feel like 2023 was a huge step back for AEW's women's division. I thought they had a pretty damn good 2021 and 2022. And then we had the, a really dire Outcast versus Originals feud that just seemed like it didn't go anywhere. It was like the NWO from the 90s, late 90s in WCW, except without any of the good parts. And just a very frustrating situation.
And if you look at it, like the roster, I think is going to be as good as it's ever been. They have the potential, but yeah, you have this cartoon character up top that the world of the division kind of revolves around. But I think Mariah May's been a really good pickup. If they do get Mercedes Moné, like it's going to be and if Jamie Hayter comes back from injury, like it's going to be as stacked a division of like compelling names that can really go in the ring, that have some like cachet with fans. But yet, if they're all going to have to just stand around as Tony Storm makes weird faces and Wendy Richter references, it's like that mutes a lot of my enthusiasm for it.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that they're starting to put together a good division. We moved away from the Outcast being so heavily featured, and I think that did hurt things for a while. Queen Aminata is a revelation. I thought she's done really well the past few weeks. I'd like to see more Lady Frost to figure out if that was just the Mariah May effect there, or because I thought that she looked really good in that match. And I think she could be something if that is, a normal performance for her. And I mean, Willow Nightingale is a future star. And by future, I mean like 2 months from now, if you push it right. She's a phenomenal talent, and they just have a lot of skill on this roster. And it's been a frustrating year because they just felt like they misused it all. And now we have not just Timeless Tony as like a heavily gimmicked, character, I guess. But also on the TBS side, you have, spooky Julia Hart, which is, I think working better, but still it's very much a shtick heavy gimmick.
At least with Julia Hart, the gimmick's more confined just to a cool ring entrance.
Yeah.
And occasionally when she's at ringside for the House of Black, she wears a hat and looks cool and makes, stern expressions where she looks like she's about to break at any second. I mean, where, with Toni Storm, it bleeds into everything at this point. It bleeds into her promos. It bleeds into her matches. It bleeds into her commentary. Like it's all encompassing, which if it was a good character, I mean, a character I enjoyed, I'd like that it affects everything, but because it's one that I feel is kind of, I would say she has like a 10% hit rate with me. Yeah, I like when she references Ted Turner. I enjoy that, But yeah, I do not feel the way Tony Khan does. Where you mentioned that Tony Khan clearly likes it. If you don't watch the pressers, if you watch the pressers, anytime,
it's like the greatest thing.
He lights up. Like, get you someone that looks at you in life the way Tony Khan looks at like even a scrap of paper with Toni Storm jokes he's been handed to read. Like he goes from an 8 to like a 12 in happiness when that happens. You can just tell it is totally his thing. Like when the first time I saw him react like that to a presser, I thought, this is never going away because he loves this. He loves this.
Now, I will say that I mostly liked her on commentary for Dynamite this week. I thought that it was not perfect, far from it, but it was still pretty good. There were several lines there that popped me. At the same time, I don't think it really, what made me like, I got to see this Perazzo Storm match at the same time. It was more like, if this shtick was going on Dark back in the day, the distant past 2023, I think it could have actually led to a lot of fun and could have led to some really great clips, getting passed around on social media. But at the same time, like, it feels like an act that would be at a different level than where she is within the division. And it's very frustrating. It's actually a very unique position where it's this kind of thing that doesn't work on one level, and then on the other level, when it does work, it still almost is counterintuitive or really working against like what you want to accomplish with women, a division champion. And then the last thing I want to talk about on Collision is I just love that main event. I thought that was not just a well-worked match, but like a perfectly booked match, with Mark Briscoe coming back at the end as the nice counterpoint to, the Chekhov's gun that they did earlier, Chekhov's powerbomb off the ramp, if you will, and all that good stuff. And then Daniel Garcia coming out with the Revolutionary War bandage, just missing the flute, and the guy with the drum as it came out. I thought this was, I love this. I went 4 3/4 on this. This is like in my match of the year conversation at this moment. What do you think about it?
Yeah, it was great. I agree with everything you just said there. We talk about things that add half stars, or like the nostalgia, like the love of seeing like Bryan Danielson against an aging legend. Like for me, anytime a guy wrestles a match with a big old bandage around their head, that's like a half star extra. That's my thing. It's a good match when I'm watching it, I'm pissed off that not more people aren't going to see it. Like when it hurts, like, man, this would be great for Daniel Garcia. Like, it's sad that's happening, that so few people are seeing such a great moment for him. But it's like, that's a sign of the quality of this, where it's like paining me, where it's like, the Eddie Kingston Willie Mack match was good, but I'm not like, oh, I can't. It sucks that people aren't getting to see this. It's like, man, I really wish for this guy more people would get to see this, because this is really good for him. This is great.
And Daniel Garcia came off like a future star on this. FTR got themselves like their first big win in a while, honestly. And I don't know, it just felt like, I'm going to steal the comparison Joe Lanza made, but just because he made it first, it felt like a great ending to like a classic 1992 WCW Saturday Night match.
Yeah, it was really good. And, it's funny that like the biggest talking point that came out of the show was probably the House of, Dave Meltzer saying, basically saying, they had to change the stip because the House of Black, doesn't want to take pinfalls. And then 2 of them come out and say, yeah, it's complete bullshit.
Yeah.
And now we're evaluating, and I have no idea what's true and what's not true there. But again, it just feels like that's the way sometimes it goes for AEW lately, where it's like you put on probably one of the better collisions you put on in months, and that's the biggest news that comes out of it.
Yeah, like you have this A+ like segment, like really, it's going to be one of the best things that happens on TV all year, and the whole conversation in closing it is, will Malachi does that work for Malachi Black brother?
Yeah,
and it's just so AEW, and the atmosphere, it's really been a thing since the company launched in 2019, but ever since like things got really weird with the whole CM Punk round 2 situation, and MJF's Brochacho line really falling apart, it's really kind of tragic comic, because this is a company, even for all the stuff last year that sucked, and like pretty much the entirety of that MJF storyline was just a real mess. I feel like the whole title run, essentially, especially after the Bryan Danielson feud, was severely flawed in some way, even when he was doing good matches. But it's a damn shame that, even with that stuff on there, like you were still getting like the Continental Classic, or just like really, Kenny Omega Hijo del Vikingo is like maybe my all-time favorite TV match. And just like all kinds of other stuff. And it's just, the conversation is just completely surrounded by the downsides of AEW. And it's very funny.
I always say, like, right now, there's a lot of stuff happening right now that will be like when I was growing up. The Death Valley Driver guys on the classic wrestling review site, they were always huge into, like, check out this great WCWC show match that people don't remember, or you missed out on. I feel like there's so much stuff happening in this era, like stuff even on Rampage, where it's like just neat little things. Where it's not like a classic thing, but it's like, oh, this is the kind of thing where removed from context in a few years, they're just like, man, this was a pretty cool thing that happened. This was a neat little thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, everything gets kind of tainted with just the vibe. The vibes are bad. They are in some ways. They are bad. There are pockets of good vibes, but a lot of bad ones.
I think the vibes have improved some over the past couple months, but still the vibes are not great.
Yeah.
But I do think that one way that they're turning chicken shit into chicken salad, if you allow me my Appalachian phrase, is kind of the way that the heel Young Bucks are approaching, or their character is now, which feels like a very meta acknowledgement of things that have happened in the past couple years, and a way to kind of twist that into this new character that is just inherently unlikable, that the two have. And I think it's really kind of a little, just a touch of creative genius that I really enjoy.
It's funny though, because they're kind of going the opposite way of, like, they're leaning into a negative perception of a backstage, like, power player, but it's not the negative perception they had been getting in the last year. Like, if they want to lean into their negative perception, it would just see like they're almost seeing like their character now is like that they care too much, like they're micromanaging things and being very overbearing and kind of egotistical, where, like, if they want to lean into, like, the negative perception people were fully, it should be like, oh, we don't really care, like, oh, the Bucks left early tonight, they're not watching the ROH matches and giving notes. I mean, that probably won't be a fun character, like, that sells, but, like, oh, they're preoccupied with, like, a hot burn they just laid down on social media, like instead it's like, no, they're very attentive, oh, they're going to lay down some fines, right? Like, that's kind of like not the negative perception they have been getting recently.
Yeah, but it is a very creative way, I think, to just kind of take the overarching viewpoint, which is that they have this, this attitude backstage of, not being well suited to being execs, I guess, and to kind of twist it into this really effective character, because those two are just, especially Matt, are just really naturals at being unlikable on camera. They do well enough when they're faces, and especially when the time calls for it, but, like, especially last year, they got really directionless as baby faces, and this is the kind of thing that they need to do on a pretty regular basis to, I think, to stay relevant characters.
No, like, I agree in this. I mean, I'm kind of undecided. I'm still waiting to see how this character plays out. I'm kind of not 100% sure where I am on it yet, but, like, I will say, like, agreeing with your larger point, I feel like the Young Bucks are always at their best when they are, like, actively, like, leaning into the exact things their critics hate about them. Like, that's what they kind of made their name on the indies, was the idea of, oh, you think we throw too many super kicks? Well, now we're going to throw, like, 300% more super kicks. Like, we're going to make it our whole thing. Like that's always been the secret ingredient to their recipe, has been just rubbing our finger in whatever wound people that don't like us have. Like, we're not going to avoid it or tiptoe around or try and placate you. We're going to go the opposite way.
The I'm not touching you of booking philosophies.
Yeah.
But overall, I thought this was a really heavily mediocre Dynamite. I thought the highlights were basically Hangman Page against Toa Leona, which was a nice little mean guy match. And the main event where Rob Van Dam, did very well. I think that's actually the best he's looked of any of his AEW appearances so far. And, I think there's plenty of, things to ask here. Like, should Swerve Strickland really at this point in time be going 50-50? And honestly, it felt like more towards Rob Van Dam than just 50-50, but should he be splitting this match with this veteran? And, you can ask that kind of stuff. I think that's not unfair, but all the same, like, I thought this match worked really well. I thought it was, I think it still kind of accomplished, like, Swerve Strickland was kind of caught off guard by not just the opponent, although the hints they gave are the most obvious things ever. Wrestling is really bad at like teasing things. They either give like clues that are just completely inscrutable, or else they'll give you a clue that's like, his name rhymes with Bob Van Dam. Maybe you can figure it out at home. And it's just, it's just very funny how it works. But yeah, I mean, I thought this match was about as good as you're going to get Rob Van Dam in 2024. I thought he had a nice showing. I thought, I think Swerve is a fantastic performer, at his apex right now. And, they had a little addition of Samoa Joe on commentary, and then the nice little post-match angle. This Page Swerve Strickland feud is, one of the best in AEW history, I think. And, but on the downside, like, there was a lot on this show that just kind of was, not outright bad. Even Wardlow Commander, which was just a long squash, was like, that was like a 2-star match, like a competent match that I didn't hate or anything, but, like, Jericho and Fletcher, I think, way under-delivered from what you would expect those two to do together. It just felt very off-kilter a lot. And, like, you had a very directionless Bang Bang Scissor Gang segment, which was basically like, hey, we exist. Hi. Yeah. And then they left. And, it's just kind of a show of a lot of that level of stuff. Like, yeah, that was fine, but when 70% of the show is like, this is fine stuff, given what Dynamite normally delivers, it's a disappointment.
Yeah, it didn't feel like a lot of like the chess pieces moved in interesting ways. Like, I mean, it is technically continuing the Hangman Swerve feud by having them each pick each other's opponents, but that's also a gimmick that I always usually dislike, because unless you pick like the absolute best wrestler, it's always like, you know what, if I can pick anyone to really give you a challenge and weaken you, Swerve, it's gonna be a 53-year-old Rob Van Dam.
Yeah, I know, right?
I got one half of the Gates of, and I know with the Gates of, they tried to say, he hasn't lost in this respect, blah blah blah, but like, still, it's like, I think most fans it puts you to your wrestlers in a position of like, are you fucking stupid? Pick one of the the top stars here to take on.
I will somewhat defend the Toa Leona pick, because one, he is presented like, even as like a guy in a 6-man tag, he's always like the guy on that tag, and he is generally booked like just this crazed monster that is basically like Ming in the 90s for WCW.
Yeah.
Like, he may not be like a world champion, but at any time someone's like, hey, you're going to face Ming, it's kind of like, oh shit. And I think that's kind of where Toa Leona slots in these days. But yeah, like, other than just like, hey, it's Rob Van Dam, isn't that fun? Like, if Adam Page theoretically has anyone that's kind of like on the babyface side of things or whatever, like, why would he not pick Bryan Danielson or like anyone along those lines, and instead go with like his first pick is like, yeah, Rob Van Dam's gonna whoop this guy's ass.
But that's why I feel like my opinion on this show was very middling, but I feel like it's a show that's helped when they announced such a big card for next week, where it's like, if they just announced nothing at the show, I'd be like, man, they're kind of in a funk right now on Dynamite.
Yeah, for sure.
But the fact is, like, okay, we gave you a middle of the road thing, but like, it's all coming next week. Then you feel, in a way, you feel almost a little bit better, because you're like, okay, maybe you're easing up a little bit to really go crazy next week. But if they had just said, next week, Hook will be here, I would have been even more down on this show than like, okay, this was not a good week. But
in action next week, Konosuke Takeshita against a local competitor.
Powerhouse Hobbs will be in action.
Yes.
But yeah, Chris Jericho, obviously there's always the big elephant in the room with him. But yeah, it's funny, like, it's always fascinating, because Chris Jericho's a guy, if we're just talking about his in-ring, where I think in like his AEW tenure, there's been like 3 or 4 times where I'm like, okay, he's done. And then he kind of comes back. I'm like, okay. Yeah. And like, watching that match, it wasn't the worst he ever looked, but there were times where, he was clearly trying hard. And then I was watching him going, boy, like, the shrimp on the Jericho cruise really are again too, aren't they? Like, you're feeling multiple kinds of hangovers here. And, he's at the age where every time you see one of those performances, that could be the start of something that never gets better. You know, we've
Exactly.
seen him pull out of that,
Yeah.
but there's going to be one of these times where he starts that decline and he can't hit that higher gear ever again.
Yeah.
And it's coming. You know, one day it will arrive eventually.
Yeah, and I don't know that this is like the end of his prime, like not even prime. I shouldn't say that, but like his ability to have good matches. But I will say that at his age, it is a very brave call after you've done what is obviously like a week-long cruise where you were not focusing on like your exercise routine, right?
Yeah.
And to immediately be like, well, as soon as I get back, I'm going to be on Dynamite and wrestle someone. Like, I think that's a very gutsy call. Is it a smart call? No, those two things aren't really the same, but it is on some level a brave call.
And then right again next week to Takeshita. So like,
Yeah.
you know, that's going to have expectations all on its own too. You know, you're not going to be able to half-ass it there.
Yeah, I think he's going to, you know, have a little more time to get his road work in, if you will. But, you know, it does seem like and I think maybe this is an accidental positive to Jericho here. You know, obviously, if he did something wrong, and I've said this multiple times on our show here, you know, and by our show, I mean you and me, Trevor.
Yes, yes.
But I've said this multiple times on the Good, Bad, and Hungee, where obviously if Jericho did anything, you know, appalling, any kind of sexual crime, he should be thrown out on his ass like immediately, if you know that. But the way it's been presented is Nick Hausman like doing really weird stuff on Twitter, and then Kylie, you know, like people being like, "Look, Kylie Ray liked a tweet that is kind of vaguely about this situation." And you know, if he did do something to Kylie Ray, you know, I hope every bad thing that possibly could happen to him does happen. But I think like we just don't have any information to me that is like concrete enough to, you know, be like, well, we got to end his career, you know, and it's just a really weird situation. But I do think, I kind of wonder if one really weird side effect of the Vince story is that people are going to just not really think about this too much, you know, going forward. And, you know, I do hope AEW does a serious investigation, you know, into if there is something like this, you know, that they did do that when Kylie Ray left, and that they, you know, picked up the phone and were like, "Hey, Kylie, look, we already talked, I know, but we got to do a little fact checking here, see if there something, you know, happened here." But, you know, I think there's definitely an onus on the company, especially when Tony Khan is sitting there and saying this is the safest company to work for in the world.
Yeah.
You can't, you know, half-ass this. And I really do hope that they didn't. But it does seem like that Jericho is able to wrestle now without the crowd turning on his very presence. So for whatever that's worth. But yeah, this felt like a very old Dynamite too. You know, between an old Jericho performance and Rob Van Dam and Jeff Hardy, you know, it wasn't exactly here's the stars of the future.
Yeah, and we're one of the two big matches next week we're building to is Sting, you know, which
Yeah.
you know you should be. This is his final run, but yeah, again, it's one of those things where in a hot company in front of big crowds, that's not a negative. But again, it starts adding to that TNA vibe when
Or late
it's
stage
cold.
WCW.
Yeah, and you're leaning so much on quote unquote names. But yeah, I mean, next week is a big week for them. It's a week where they can, and honestly, it's one of those things where next week is big for them, but then the week after, I feel like it's just as big because if they do get momentum, it's about
They
not
gotta
having
follow
another
up.
Dynamite like this one. You know, you got to follow it up with another good one.
Yeah, you can't. They have Tony Khan has a heavy reliance on just really being afraid of putting his top stars against each other, and I think, you know, like you don't want to just, you know, do it on a random, you know, Dynamite, just have like, you know, two top guys, like, and without any build, here's some Ojo against, you know, Sting or something, right?
Yeah.
But you know, they've built the Swerve Adam Page thing really well, but at the same time, like you can't actively avoid booking it except for pay-per-views, you know. It's just he's got to be a little more aggressive, I think, and I think that's just been a consistent issue with him.
And in a contract year, honestly, like even though I grew up where pay-per-views were the be-all end-all, in a contract year, the most important thing is the TV ratings,
Exactly.
Pay-per-view buys. If you give up 20,000 pay-per-view buys because you cannibalize a really good match you could have put on pay-per-view to, you know, pop a few big numbers on Collision here and there, or Dynamite, like this is the year where that's really going to be worth it more than any year.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they have to show out, and this isn't the time to be afraid to like ask, insert any high level star here to do a job or two, if necessary, if the story dictates it. But yeah, I think that's basically my big thoughts coming off this Dynamite is, I do think they built a really good story there, and with Paige and Swerve, and I thought that Rob Van Dam had a surprisingly good performance. This Jeff, it feels like they're going to turn the Hardys heel, and I think that's just going to die on the vine two different ways. One, I don't think I don't think either of them is good enough to be able to do that, to be like a featured performer in AEW in 2024. I think they're both just they both look just very physically shot, for lack of a better way of putting it. Like they seem to have a hard time moving. And secondly, like, I was kind of thinking about this as Jeff Hardy made his appearance, or his entrance, I should say. He's doing this kind of sulking character, and Matt Hardy's, yelling at him at the top of the ramp to like try to hype him up, and it's kind of a heel way slightly. When they showed the crown and everything, like, it was just like, hey, it's a Hardy, we love the Hardys reaction.
Yeah.
And it's not like based on anything new, and it's not based on anything that they've done to like build that momentum. It's 100% a nostalgia pop. And I really think that I don't think there's any sign that you're going to be able to pull off like an effective heel turn with these guys. I don't think they've been pushed for long enough in AEW. Like, they really haven't done anything at all since Jeff had his suspension and his arrest and everything. They just kind of been background players, and I just don't think that you've got the cachet with them to have a meaningful heel turn, and I think it's just going to flop. But I am also afraid that they're going to do it because they feel like they have to use the Hardys because they're the Hardys.
And I think you put it best earlier in the show when you said, that the Hardys in this case could be like subtraction by addition, where I feel like and we also kind of going back to what we said about Wardlow, like, if you rehab them, is it worth making the effort to rehab all that, use all those resources? Like, even if you could get the Hardys over, is having a relatively over heel Hardys or even babyface Hardys at their age and their physical condition, like, how much are you going to get out of that? I feel like, again, you're using up precious TV time and attention, that you could be using on someone you could invest in for a decade to come, that you're not going to have to worry about falling apart. Someone that I'll say this, the Hardys, one of the great tag teams of their generation. They had great careers. I think they're both very talented guys, but even when they have middle of the road performances these days, it hurts to watch them because they both are in the condition, and especially with Jeff Hardy's history of problems. It's like, I get bummed out watching them. Like, I worry for them. It's even when they kind of have a decent match, like you said, their movement is just so difficult. There was that thing earlier in the year where Jeff botched stuff, and they were trying, and then they tried to leak to the newsletters like, no, he meant to do all those botches. Like,
the Sabu strategy.
Yeah, like, it's just there are so many veterans. AEW has had such a good history of veterans that, like, wow, I can't believe they're getting this much out of them, and it's kind of fun to watch them. Like, it's a feel good thing. Yeah. The Hardys are like the feel bad veterans, where it's like, I worry for you guys. It looks like you're really struggling out there. You are unhappy with how this is going. It's just a huge bummer all around. And yeah, going to what you said, like, even if you can kind of do a heel thing with Jeff Hardy, I don't think it's going to be like, boo Jeff Hardy. It's going to be, oh, this is a bummer.
Like I think it's going to lead to pretty dead crowds if you try to do it. And the frustrating thing is they were in a position where I feel like they could have actually elevated Isaiah Cassidy. Because, the couple of times that they did the 6-man tags with him doing the heavy lifting for the Hardys, like, I think he really showed out. I think he had some very good performances and looked like, oh, this is what they saw in Private Party back in 2019 when they tried to strap the rocket to him. And, Mark Quinn came back, and, like, I don't think he's fully back yet. He's kind of working through some rust and maybe a little cardio, but I would much rather be like, okay, we're going to try to make Private Party a thing than the Hardys a thing this year.
Yeah, again, it's just the most valuable commodity AEW has, and they do not have enough to go around, is time.
Yes.
And so when you look at it, it's almost like, usually a lot of times with wrestling, we look at things and we go, oh, is this worthy trying to push this guy, in the sense of just, well, what are the odds that they get over or not? And to me, with AEW, you have to add this extra thing, which is, could, even if it does get them kind of over, could this time be used on someone else? You know, that would be a better use. You know, who are you investing? Because you can't invest in everyone on this roster. It's too big.
Yeah.
And it's just one of the matter where, so like when I look at something like the Hardys or Wardlow, it's almost like, not could this work, but even if it did work, you know, is that the best use of all this time and effort you're going to have to spend?
Yeah. And would that time be better spent on, like you mentioned earlier, someone younger and who will likely be around in 5 years if they sign them? Like, you know, I would rather they be giving Ricky Starks this big, you know, this amount of time, or Daniel Garcia, like these guys who I think could easily be foundational blocks of this company, and instead are, I mean, like, obviously Starks is a champion, and they've done a really good job with the Daniel Garcia storyline and Collision. I think they've done wonders with him. But like Ricky Starks, like, he's got a belt, but like it feels like, you know, he's a secondary character at this point, and he's so charismatic and a damn good wrestler. It just doesn't make any sense to me sometimes.
And honestly, though, I will say I like Ricky Starks a lot. I actually think Big Bill's almost sometimes outshining him on promos.
Oh yeah,
like
this is a Big Bill show.
Yeah, he's a revelation, and he has this weird, I was thinking the other day, I don't know if this is a thing or not, or if I'm just inventing this in my head, but he has like this extra kind of juice that I think comes from when someone like loses something and then gets it back. Like there's this, like when you watch him, there's this extra kind of pop to him where it's almost like, my career went really bad, my life went really bad, and now I'm kind of back.
Yeah.
And I feel like he, in a way, he's almost got like an extra confidence that I feel like if that stuff didn't happen, might not be there. It's almost like,
yeah, I think so. I think that's good analysis. And frankly, the comp I have in my head whenever I think about him is it's Chris Masters with a good push when he came back to WWE.
Yeah.
After his first release, you know, he wasn't good. He was over pushed, and then they were like, "Oh, you're not good. Bye." And then they brought him back, and it seemed like it took the fans a while, and management never did figure out that he actually was good then. And Big Bill is like a better version of that with somewhat better recognition. Like, he's in AEW now, and it's like, this guy's a legit worker.
Yeah, and it's just, it's interesting that they don't really have like it. I actually like that act, and it works. But really, like, the act is really just, we're like it is a testament to sometimes wrestling. You don't always need to overthink things, because really what works about them is literally just, we're two charismatic guys randomly thrown together. We're not really like we're not feuding, but we're not like friends outside this. We're just like two random charismatic guys that are going to talk charismatically,
and we're getting business done.
Yeah, exactly, and it works.
I like when they lap shaded that in a couple promos, I think during the Jericho Guevara feud, Jericho Omega, where they were going to take on those Winnipeg Jets, and at some point Starks is in the ring with Bill and is like, "Bill, I don't know your birthday." Bill's like, "Yeah," and Starks is like, "I don't really care."
Yeah, they did that one of the pressers too. Like, they're really emphasizing that, just like, you know, hey, like, we don't know each other. Like, we're probably not gonna be like the best. Like, we don't hate each other, but it's just like, you know, we're two coworkers that work well together.
Yeah, and it's a shame because, like, especially when early on AEW actually was a tag team company to some extent. Like, now it's like a real dire division, and you have this good act, and it feels like, one, you just are going to let it go by the wayside because you've taken like this very WWE view of tag teams as by nature a secondary act if it's not the Young Bucks or Sting and Darby. And secondly, like, you know, it's just really you have found money is essentially what it is.
Yeah,
you found like a 20 in your jacket, and instead of like, hey, I got 20 extra bucks I didn't expect, I guess I'll do something with this. It's practically like you're crumpling it up and throwing it away. Like, this must be a fake or something, you know.
And it is the most Ricky Starks thing ever, where like, this thing gets randomly thrown together. It kind of finds, like, you get something extra of it that you didn't expect. And then they were supposed to lose the tag titles to Omega and Jericho, and that only gets changed because Omega's stomach explodes. And now it's like they're, you know, whether they retain or not next week, it really, like, Ricky,
it's almost beside the point.
Yeah, Ricky was kind of making the point in the promo on Dynamite, where it's like, you know, it's yet another time where, you know, they're in the background of someone else's story, you know, like that, the idea of, oh, Sting and Darby, you're just looking past this and taking it as like an assumption that you're going to win and take these to Revolution, all that stuff. Where again, it's like, you know, Ricky is once again kind of like, just the side stop on someone else's story. It's not his story, it's someone else's.
Yeah, and going back to the you can only reheat someone so many times, like I think Starks is really resilient to that. I think because he's just so damn charismatic and so damn talented. But it's you got to stop playing around with this guy. Like he's a tremendous talent, and I can't believe that they're not like pushing him to the moon right now. That they're not treating him as like one of those top future guys and doing everything they can to feature him in as positive a light as possible.
Yeah, I can say I talked with someone at AEW once who was like worried that like they were going to drop the ball with Ricky at one point when he got hot.
Yeah.
And then I think they've dropped the ball with him like 2 or 3 more times.
Yeah.
So like they paused it and they were like, "Oh, this is the big time for him." And then
because
it's like 3 resets.
Yeah, there was the time that he was the babyface against MJF, and then like there was a little cool off period, and then he was the babyface against Jericho and really got over there, and then he just like disappeared. And this is like I appreciate Tony Khan, like the cycling people out thing makes sense to an extent, but like it's got to be the right time. And if a guy is like actively hot, like Starks has been a couple times, he's the last guy you should be cycling out. He's the guy you should be shoving down people's throats to be like, look, this is a future star. He is on the come up, and it's even worse than like when Hangman Page disappears for what seems like 6 months at a time. Like Hangman Page is a main event draw. Like he's an actual drawing card you have. And sometimes it's just like, well, go hang out in Virginia for a while, buddy. And it's worse than Starks because, or I'm sorry, Starks is worse. I meant to say, because at least when Page comes back, he's Adam Page. Everyone's going to pop for him, and he's still going to move the needle. Ricky Starks, like he's not at that level yet, and it's a dangerous game because despite all his talent, like you never know when the crowd might just get tired of him. You could have that Tyler Black and Ring of Honor thing.
Yeah, I appreciate the Ring of Honor reference. Thank you for indulging me. But no, I think that's a great point too, which is we talk about the stop-start thing. But once you get to a top-tier level, that problem goes away. In fact, sometimes then absence makes the heart grow fonder. But you have to kind of make it to the top and prove to fans that you're a top guy. Yeah. Before you can do that. Like if you're a Roman Reigns, or it's weird to bring up his name this week, but a Brock Lesnar or someone like that, you can leave for a month or two and come back, and people will not be like, oh, it's stop start. They'll be like, oh, it's a cool rare treat. But if you don't get to that top level first and really establish yourself there, then it has the opposite effect.
Yes, and I think we definitely saw that with Wardlow as well.
Yeah.
But I think that's mainly my main thoughts from Dynamite this week. Do you have anything to add?
No, I think that's good. Yeah, I think that covers a lot of it.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that's pretty much the week that was in AEW. Kind of a quiet news week, really. I think we're in this very awkward position where we're kind of waiting on Mercedes Moné and possibly Okada to come in and make their debuts, and that'll be huge news stories. And this is probably a week where it's good to stay out of the news because if AEW was in the news, that probably meant some connection to this Vince McMahon awfulness, and obviously that no one wants that. So
yeah.
Well, Trevor, thank you for joining us this week. I really do appreciate it. And I know obviously you'll be back next week when we
obviously like it's
the regular co-hosts of the show get back together. But please plug your stuff.
Yeah, I have a podcast with my friend Matt Feuerstein covering Ring of Honor history called Through the Years. It's spelled THROH for through if you want to look it up. And we've been doing this for feels like 18 years, but it's probably over half a decade. But no, it's like the best thing I do. We've covered everything from the first show all the way through. We're getting trucking through 2006, so I'm really proud of it. Got a lot of good feedback. My Twitter is at Trevor Dame, and if you look at my profile, I have a little link tree that has links to everything else, so Patreon and all that stuff, so I don't have to belabor anything else. And yeah, I by the way, I don't just host the show; I live with you now. I don't know if you know that. I live with you. I don't have to take the bed every night. I do want it some nights, but yeah, I'm really glad that we could work this out today.
It's a good arrangement. Just look, just don't sleep on my feet. That's all I ask. But yes, thank you again for joining us. This is the good, the bad, and the Hungee once again, and a couple things I want to go over real quick before we leave. First of all, you can email us hungeepod@gmail.com, hungeepod@gmail.com. We're on Twitter, which I have not actively logged into on this account for a couple weeks now, but at Good Bad Hungee. We also have a channel on the Voices of Wrestling Discord server. Please subscribe, rate, and review so that our masters at the algorithm will love and appreciate us. And our theme song this week, because Tyler couldn't stop me, was Tom Lehrer's Poisoning Pigeons in the Park. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you have a great week. Thanks, Trevor.
Thank you.
Hola, hola, my name is Ricardo. I am the host of the Lucha Jovers podcast here in the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network. We are a Spanish-speaking show dedicated to discussing and analyzing pro wrestling from all across the world. From AEW to CMLL, we talk about American wrestling, Japanese wrestling, and of course, Lucha Libre. If something big happened in the pro wrestling world, we will talk about it. So if you know Spanish or have a friend that knows Spanish or want to practice your Lucha Libre pronunciations, go listen to the Lucha Jovers podcast right here in the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network. Nos vemos por ahí.